Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be taking a look at sustainable packaging and how businesses can use the environmental credentials of packaging to increase sales within their value chains. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the supply chain and waste management channels here at 2 Degrees. I'm delighted to welcome our presenters today. Joining us from Chicago is Laura Flanagan, Director of the Consumer Goods Sector of PE International. We're also very fortunate to be joined by Lucy Calton, Product Sustainability Manager at Innovia Films. Today's presentations will last around 40 minutes, which will leave us with 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Just type in your question and press send, and then we'll wait until the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Laura, who will get us started with today's presentation. So Laura, over to you.
Stephen, very glad to be here. Thanks everyone for joining us today. So just a quick refresh of our objectives given the title here. We are working to convey examples of how to drive profitability up and down the value chain using environmental credentials, as Stephen just mentioned, and talking about the tools that actually allow that performance evaluation to be identified, and then a specific case study from Innovia on how they're using these tools and performance to drive business growth. Before I jump in, I just want to give you a quick overview of PE International for context. We are a sustainability consulting and software company that enables organizations to succeed sustainably by driving business value from sustainability performance. And we've been working with clients on product and enterprise performance for more than 20 years, and I'm looking forward to bringing some of those perspectives to you here today. So the title of today's webinar is Increasing Profitability from Sustainable Packaging, and the source of that potential value really is fourfold. Sustainable packaging can drive profitability in the form of increasing revenue in terms of sales, but also decreasing cost and enhancing brand or reducing risk. So in order to really orient us on this framework and provide some foundation for how you can realize that value in your organization, I'll give you an example of each quadrant. The first is Craft Yes Pack. This is an example of how sustainable packaging can be revenue generating. The Yes Pack is an innovative product that replaces the rigid plastic jug used in commercial kitchens. You can see the flexible pack pour in the image there. The design resulted from the desire from Kraft to create more sustainable packaging while also reducing costs to the organization. So having this holistic perspective on their design objectives, this team was able to not only achieve significant improvements in terms of sustainability. Our life cycle assessment of the product determined that the design reduced energy, transportation emissions, waste generations, and several other impacts by 50% or more each. But their efforts also resulted in a better package in terms of performance to the customer. It's easier to use, and you get more product out of the package. It even takes up less space in your waste bin, etc. The design revision, ultimately driven by a desire to reduce material, actually resulted in a better way to meet customer needs. So this is a great example of how just taking a different lens on the design process can actually produce innovative results, but also help you meet sustainability goals. This example from Puma shows the scale of what can be accomplished in terms of cost reduction when starting with a sustainability goal in packaging design. The clever little bag you might have heard about a couple years ago is a design update to a traditional shoe box, but instead of the enclosed box, the shoes are delivered in a bag that encloses a smaller box. It still provides the core function to the customer, but it uses significantly less material and energy in production. That's direct cost savings for Puma, as is shown in the red underline from this screenshot of their website. It's also a great example of how sustainable packaging can actually achieve multiple business objectives, because while there might not have been many customers specifically going out to buy shoes because of this innovation, it sure got a lot of media attention, and that connects back to our goal around brand enhancement. So it's a good reminder to consumers as well that interesting, innovative, sustainable design needs to be clever and not just conservative or flimsy or granola. Method is a good example of sustainable packaging for the benefit of enhancing brand. Method's core brand promise is design plus sustainability, and they continue to innovate to meet that need. They've got hyper-concentrated laundry detergent, the refill pouches, which are less common in the segments that they target, and now they're making bottles made from ocean plastic, and somehow managed to get ocean plastic to look pretty sleek. So this material has a long way to go in terms of being viable at a large scale, not only in terms of availability, but also efficiency of the process. They're actually still collecting the material manually on the beaches of Hawaii for the purposes of making this package. But bringing sustainability to their innovation lens is inherently how Method is delivering on their brand commitments. My example for risk is Colgate. They just announced new 2020 sustainable packaging goals related to recyclability and recycled content as part of Colgate's overall commitments to drive sustainability in the company. And many companies are working towards recyclability and recycled content goals as a focus area for sustainable packaging. This is a concern for consumers everywhere, retailers, it enables material recovery, lots of reasons to choose that for focus. But Colgate was also specifically responding to a shareholder resolution related to extended producer responsibility of their packaging. So the growing number and diversity of regulations for packaging take-back and disposal fees, along with the brand risk and implications for profitability of not proactively responding to those changes and the shareholder resolutions related to them, is significant. So setting proactive reduction goals to reduce this risk to the business is smart design, and it also drives business value. So maybe these examples feel like old hat, maybe you've seen them before, or maybe you feel like it doesn't really help you make the case for finding that game-changing innovation in your company. So I wanted to share some thoughts about our experience and how you can achieve similar results for your organization. The first step is determining your vision. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. The number one issue we see with our clients is they don't really know what they mean by sustainable in general or sustainable packaging in particular for their organization. So it's hard to innovate towards that unclear goal in the future. We do have a definition of sustainable packaging from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, but most organizations are still figuring out how and where to get started because it is really a long-term vision for sustainable packaging. So determine if your vision is about blazing the trail for new technologies like Method with ocean plastic, or if it's more about efficiency and performance like Craft, or if it's about something else altogether before you build out the program on how you're going to design to that goal and how you're going to communicate it in your brand commitments. That linkage to a core vision is critical to actually realizing the business value. The next step is to establish clear targets. They don't have to be as lofty as Interface's Mount sustainability goals, perhaps, where they've actually sought to redesign all commerce as part of their targets. But interim goals are important based on the vision that you've established in the previous step. They don't even have to be quantitative goals, but they should be measurable and achievable. And that's really what allows you to integrate and drive the implementation of your sustainable packaging in a way that it will be successful. The third critical step in sustainable packaging is considering the product. This is obvious when it comes to product protection for most packaging engineers, but sometimes sustainability makes companies temporarily forget the bigger product system. So it's possible to shift the environmental burdens to elsewhere in the product life cycle if you overdo sustainability of packaging, and not just in terms of potential product loss. So make sure you're working with the product development teams if you're not already, just to make sure that there's a holistic approach to considering the company's overall sustainability goals when reducing packaging burden. Now, in step 4, can you start actually thinking about new design? In your implementation of your vision and goals, consider building sustainability criteria into stage gate development, building training programs, investigating design support tools that help evaluate the impact of different design scenarios. Like PE has a tool called Gabby Envision that Innovia will talk about later that is one of these types of tools. But the key is to be intentional, strategic, and integrated to your approach to implementation, because most packaging engineers will not, in fact, take it upon themselves to do the hard work of balancing cost, performance, and sustainability without an incentive to do so, whether that's a carrot or a stick. So you can put great tools out there or a great commitment, but a fool with a tool is still a fool. We still need to give them sort of the reason to do something differently. The last step is really the communication side, not only your successes and not before the above 4 steps have been completed. It doesn't have to be a key part of messaging to be effective, but transparency and consistency with internal and external stakeholders will be key to driving your success moving forward. Without these steps, you'll see false starts, confusion, lack of consistency, and generally little progress towards sustainability and limited business value. It's only through that focused and strategic approach that you can begin to see the business benefits I talked about on the previous slides. Since I mentioned the Sustainable Packaging Coalition's 8 principles, I wanted to just share those for those who might not be familiar. They're more than a decade old now, so it's a great resource for anyone who's getting started or looking to check the status of their initiative. The principles really are holistic in terms of being social, environmental, and economic components of sustainability, and they do capture the full life cycle of the packaging, so back through what materials you choose as well as how that packaging is manufactured and what happens at end of life. So thinking about the life cycle of your packaging is really important to achieving this long-term vision. I put a lot of emphasis on the execution stage of this step because of that importance of not relying on packaging engineers just to jump in with both feet. So one thing I wanted to make a quick note about is a big roadblock we see with our clients is this misperception that quantifying the footprint and the life cycle of packaging or that larger product system has to be a slow, difficult, and expensive process. And it's just no longer true. So check in your organization if this perception is creating a barrier to your program, because it will be an easy one to fix. Don't get me wrong, a lot of people can and do still spend a lot of money on assessments, but you don't have to. There's a spectrum of detail and complexity to product evaluations, from qualitative to extensive, and a corresponding set of appropriate uses to those tools. It ultimately goes back to your vision and your goals. If your vision is to drive efficiency or to support directional decisions, the left side of the spectrum might be sufficient. If you're looking to make competitive claims, more detailed assessments are recommended. And there's other reasons you might want to do a more detailed assessment, like looking for dig sites in particular production processes or your supply chain to identify the next round of beyond the low-hanging fruit for improvement. But the main point here is make sure you consider what you're trying to achieve before you evaluate what kinds of tools that you need. Our recommendation is really to try out a tool to get a feel for what kind of functionality is really needed given your vision and your goal, and then buy what you need. Look for a tool that can be built based on your particular organization and supply chain and that has the capability to include product evaluations as well. And one final point related to the myth that quantifying your footprint has to be difficult. It's also important to understand the full life cycle footprint, even if you have goals that relate more to design attributes like lightweighting or recyclability. As is the case with including the product as well as your packaging in your evaluation, it's very easy to find yourself with unintended consequences that actually increase the burden of your product system without a holistic view. It doesn't mean you should change your goals or compromise these attributes, but it's important to be informed about the decisions you're making in order to achieve that long-term vision of increasing revenue, decreasing cost, enhancing brand, or reducing the risk you were seeking. So we've put together a few resources for you as you begin your journey. Keep an eye out for the follow-up email with slides in order to access these tools. I'm a little ahead of schedule here, but with that, I'll hand things over to Stephen for Lucy to start talking about Innovia and how they've achieved business value through their efforts.
Great, thank you, Laura. So we'll now hand over to Lucy, who's going to give us some insight from Innovia Films.
Okay, what I would like to do today is to introduce you to the concept of the sustainability wheel, which we use as a tool to demonstrate the sustainability benefits of flexible biopackaging constructions, and also to show you how we've used a life cycle assessment tool developed for us by PE International using the Gabby Envision that Laura mentioned earlier, to give us a good indication of the carbon footprint impact of these sort of biopackaging constructions. But just thought I'd start with a very brief introduction to Innovia Films, as some of you might not be familiar with our company. We're a film manufacturer, and we actually manufacture both conventional plastic and bioplastic films, which does give us a balanced view of both. We manufacture polypropylene films in the UK, Belgium and Australia, and we manufacture cellulose films also in the UK and in America. And the majority of our films are sold into label, packaging and tobacco applications. Our headquarters are in Cumbria in the UK, and we're a strongly innovation and R&D led company. So when our customers are looking to make their packaging, for example, more sustainable, Do they go down the well-trodden path of petroleum-based plastics, which in reality is probably the easiest option, or do they go down the less well-known path towards sustainably sourced bioplastics, a number of which are now commercially available and can offer comparative functional properties to conventional plastics? So if we take a closer look at conventional plastics, which are our benchmark, they've got excellent functional performance in terms of barrier, optical properties, sealability and also cost, but then they do benefit from massive economies of scale and fully optimised processes. However, they are derived from petroleum and so they are fundamentally finite. In addition, the extraction and processing is not always benign. I'm sure most people remember the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which spilled about 5 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. This spill caused extensive damage to marine and wildlife habitats and killed 11 people, which is not sustainable. And finally, the end-of-life options are limited for conventional flexible films for a number of reasons that I'll go into a little bit later. So if we look at the core attributes of NatureFlex films, we can see that the films have got a number of technical and environmental benefits, such as a tailored moisture barrier, so we can make films which are designed to be permeable to moisture, through to films with a high moisture barrier. In addition, the films have got a high gas and aroma barrier, and they're also a very good barrier to mineral oils. They've got very good optical properties, they're transparent films, and depending on the grade you choose, you can either have a film that will give you a peel seal or a sort of hermetic lock seal. Because NatureFlex films are essentially transparent paper, they've got very good deadfall properties similar to paper, and they've also got very high heat resistance and good anti-static properties as well. And they're also easy to tear open if, for example, in a sort of laminate structure. So in terms of environmental benefits, they've got a high renewable raw material content. We use managed forestry sources. We've looked at our life cycle assessment. We've got which is independently reviewed, and carbon footprint data available. And the films have been certified for a number of end-of-life options. But although NatureFlex does have a wide range of excellent properties, the majority of packaging applications actually require a laminate structure to give all the necessary properties. And so I just wanted to talk about flexible laminates, and more specifically conventional laminates versus laminates made from biofilms. So typically, a laminate is made up of 3 layers, an outer layer which is used to enhance the appearance of the pack. This layer also needs to be stiff, resistant to heat and printable. In a conventional structure, you would normally use polyester, but this could be replaced by NatureFlex film. Layer B is usually the barrier layer, which can provide a barrier to moisture, light, gas, and also aroma as well. In conventional structures, aluminium foil or a metallized polyester film could be used. In a biolaminate, this layer could be a metallized NatureFlex film. And finally, layer C, which is the containment layer, and this gives the laminate good seal strength, seal integrity and tenacity. Polyethylene is often used in conventional structures, but there are a number of biopolymer films which could be used as a sealing layer within a biolaminate structure. And there are also now certified adhesives available for putting these constructions together to maintain the compostability. So what are the advantages of using a biolaminate solution? Because of the improvements over the last few years in the technical properties, particular barrier of these films, then it is now possible to achieve essentially conventional protective performance for many products. They offer a level of renewable raw materials, and a lot of the biofilms will have a lower carbon footprint due to the fact that they obviously uptake CO2 during the growing phase, assuming they are derived from biomass. And also they have a wide range of end-of-life options. So, So in terms of they're very good for printability as well, and the packs are lightweight as well. In terms of the disadvantages, they obviously are sort of manufactured from finite resources, and they can also have a high carbon footprint impact. And because the materials are generally mixed and incompatible, then they're essentially non-recyclable after use. So if we look at the advantages of biolaminates, they do offer sort of conventional performance. Like I said before, they have sort of renewable raw materials, a lower carbon footprint, and a wide range of end-of-life options. And this can lead to enhanced brand position and also enhanced customer marketability. And this will enable brand owners to talk proudly about their packaging, as long as they can prove it. And this is where we come on to talk about the 4 key areas which we consider when looking at product sustainability and how we quantify the different aspects. And I think you'll see a bit of overlap here with the key aspects that Laura mentioned in relation to the Sustainable Packaging Coalition criteria. So the 4 areas are the start of life, so where do the materials come from and how sustainably are they produced? And just because something's renewable, it doesn't automatically mean that it's sustainable. And then we think about the process. How do you convert the raw materials into products? And this is where the carbon footprint tool is used, which I'll come on to talk about a little bit later. In terms of performance, this is where we look at the functionality, which is very important to ensure that shelf life is not compromised. And finally, end of life. What do we do with the materials after use? And we believe that if we can get these 4 elements right, then we can meet the needs of who we see as being the 4 key stakeholder groups, so the food industry, the retailers, consumers, and the NGOs, or the media. So I'd like to talk about the 4 key areas in a little bit more detail. If we look again at the start of life, for NatureFlex, the principal raw material is wood pulp, which is sourced from responsibly managed forests in line with our wood pulp sourcing policy. And we are actually holders of Forest Stewardship Council and PEFC Chain of Custody certifications. There are other sustainability protocols available for other bioplastic films, because we're obviously forestry based, our products are forestry based, and these are ones that are relevant for NatureFlex. In terms of the content of the renewable raw materials, we've tested our films to the ASTM method shown, which actually measures, it differentiates between the old carbon, so a fossil-based carbon, and also new readily renewable carbon, and it essentially gives a ratio of the new carbon. So the majority of our films are between 90 and 98% bio-based carbon. And in addition, a number of our films are also certified by the USDA. So come on to look a little bit more about the process. A few years ago, we did do a full life cycle assessment on NatureFlex, and based on this, we made some improvements to the process over a number of years, and then redid the LCA in 2011. The second time we did it, we took it to peer review, and based on this, we published carbon footprint data online. Following on from this, we worked with PE International to develop a carbon footprinting tool using Gabby and Vision, which could be used to determine the carbon footprint of a laminate structure, both bio and conventional, to enable us to compare the data. We asked PE International to do this for us because of the work, obviously, that they've done on the NatureFlex LCA, and they'd also looked at the life cycle assessment of our polypropylene films, and we knew that the other data would be based on their databases and the Gabby software, which basically meant that we were happy with that the data was reliable and robust. And we also wanted a tool that was easy to use, and the Gabi Envision does have a user-friendly interface. Although we call it a carbon footprint tool, it does actually have the capability to evaluate other environmental impacts. So just thought I'd show you a little bit about what the tool looks like. At the top there, you can put in the scenarios that you want to evaluate. You can change the functional unit, but this is basically done in sort of meters squared of film, so the area. And then you've got 3 options to put in different film types and the grammage. You can also include transport information in there if you want to go to that level of detail. You can see from the drop-down box on the right-hand side that there are a number of different options in there. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite show you them all on the screenshot, but there are a number of bio films in there as well as conventional films. So you've got your 3 layers of film in there for your laminate structure, and then it goes down. There is actually 2 sort of options for 2 adhesives in there, because obviously you've got potential in this structure to have 2 different adhesives. And again, the transport information is on there. Don't worry too much about the information that's actually put in there. I realise there are a couple of places where it's just not applicable, and obviously for these structures there would be data in there. It includes printing as well, takes into account the process used for printing, the amount of ink used, and also the ink solvent base. Then you can include the type of solvent that's used in the ink, the amount of solvent that's put in, and then also you can account for whether or not the solvents are recycled and at what rate they're recycled, and also for the amount of waste in there as well. And then finally it comes on to include the lamination process, the energy involved for the lamination process, again the solvents if it's a solvent-based lamination, waste, and there's also areas in there where you can include the slitting, and again transport to the customer as well. So it's a very simple tool to fill in, as long as you have the information available. And then out of that, once you put all that information in, you can get a report out, which I've just shown you a couple of pages there, where you can see the carbon footprint data. It's quite small on my screen, I'm not quite sure how well you can see it, but basically you get a figure for the carbon footprint, including and excluding biogenic carbon, and also you can get a relative breakdown of where the impacts are sort of highest in the overall carbon footprint. Just to talk a little bit about the third element, the pack performance. Effective product protection is a fundamental sustainability indicator, as Laura mentioned as well, mainly due to the fact that the resources required to produce the food are much, much higher than they are to produce the packaging material. I think on Laura's slide it said the packaging was sort of 3% of the overall life cycle, which is low, but still, still important. And the shelf life optimization of the product to reduce food waste is paramount, so it is a critical element. I mentioned a little bit before about the technical properties of NatureFlex, where it does give a very high moisture and oxygen barrier, the highest moisture barrier of any bioplastic film, good barrier properties, high heat resistance, and suitable for lamination, obviously, to marry the properties together. And then end of life, finally. NatureFlex films are certified compostable to all the sort of global standards, certified home compostable as well. We've done testing for anaerobic digestion to show that they're compatible. They are suitable for incineration with energy recovery as well, and we've done testing to show that they will actually biodegrade and disintegrate in a marine environment as well. And obviously if you laminate NatureFlex films with other films, then if it's possible to use compatible materials to enable these end-of-life scenarios to be available. So I just wanted to finish with 2 example scenarios whereby can demonstrate, put everything together and show you the pictures that we get with the sustainability wheels. So I wanted to look at two constructions, a pouch construction, which would typically be made with polyester film, aluminium foil as the barrier layer, and polyethylene on the inside. This could be replaced with a transparent Natureflex film, metallized Natureflex film, and a thermoplastic starch, for example, on the inside to give you the sealability properties. And the other one that I chose was a sachet construction, which might be made currently from standard paper, aluminium foil and polyethylene, and this could be replaced with a compostable paper, metallized Natureflex, and a thermoplastic starch. So if we look at the conventional pack, where we've got polyester, aluminium foil and PE, the way that we look at it, obviously we've got the 4 areas, and we've kind of colour-coded them so that you can see we've used a traffic light system, although we do actually have 5 colours instead of 3, but we've actually got red, orange, yellow, sort of pale green, and then dark green for the different colours, sort of going through from not very good to very good. And you can see on the left hand side here where you've got 0% renewable raw materials, all the materials are fossil derived, and the end of life options are limited, which is why they're coloured in red. We looked at the process, so the carbon footprint, we looked at using the carbon footprint tool, and also the barrier properties we've evaluated, which for this structure are very good. If you compare that to the biopack, you can see that you've got about 55% renewable raw materials, which we said is pretty good. The end-of-life options, obviously there are much wider range of end-of-life options. We've opened up organic recycling as well as incineration. If we look at these materials through the carbon footprint tool, then you can see that the carbon footprint is actually lower than for the conventional structure. The moisture barrier, however, is not quite as good as the conventional structure, but still very good barrier properties for this structure, which would still be useful in a number of different applications. And then moving on to the conventional pack, you can see that on the left-hand side, you've got the raw material. Because of the paper, we've actually increased or got a reasonable level of renewable raw materials, although the majority is fossil derived. In terms of the end-of-life options, again, we're still limited. Barrier performance, again, similar to the previous conventional pack, is very good. And in terms of process, not as good as the biopack that you can see on the right-hand side, where obviously you've got a lower carbon footprint for the process, very good selection of end-of-life options, higher level of renewable raw materials, and also the barrier, you can see not quite as good there because we've taken one of the barrier layers away in a sort of transparent Natureflex on the outside and replaced it with a compostable paper, which does have an impact on the barrier properties. But you can see from this, it's just perhaps an easier way of visualising the different elements that we believe sort of go into looking at the sustainability of a packaging material, and this is how we sort of use the life cycle assessment data within that to help us. And I think that's it from me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lucy. That was great. So we've got lots of questions coming in, and we've got lots of time. So I just encourage everybody who's listening to keep sending your questions in, and we'll get to as many as we can during the next session. So to begin with, Laura, I think maybe if you want to kick off with this one, but somebody's asked, what do you need to bear in mind when assessing the impact that a switch to or switching different packaging materials might have on your production process? Do you maybe have some thoughts around that to start with?
Sure. Just to clarify, the question is, how do you balance the potential impact of changes in materials on your production process?
Exactly.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the ways we've seen some clients deal with that issue is to actually build cost considerations into the tools that they use to design packaging materials. So, when there might be a capital change, or maybe it's just a change in facility or something like that, there's a way to capture that as you're doing the environmental evaluation. So you have more of a balanced scorecard way of reviewing a particular design change. And I think the higher level question is really coming back to that ultimate goal and vision. So, when a company is establishing a clear path forward, whether it's, going towards the renewable materials like Innovia is talking about, or focusing on a different type of strategy, kind of getting that high-level buy-in that the possibility of changing production processes to achieve this long-term goal might be on the table, and going into the design question, knowing that you have that support would be a key way to sort of incorporate that consideration in the actual design.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Next question is, someone's asking, have you looked at whether this is suitable for a pharmaceutical blister pack arrangement? Lucy, I think this question is probably directed at you.
Yeah,
it would need barrier properties for a 3-year shelf life. Have you got some thoughts around that?
Yeah, a couple of things. I guess it depends what sort of barrier properties would be needed. Without knowing what the specification is, then it's sort of difficult to comment. And what type of barrier is that? Oxygen barrier or moisture barrier? I think one thing to bear in mind is that sometimes I think pharmaceuticals have slightly different requirements in terms of food contact. All our films are certified for EU and FDA food contact, but I think sometimes pharmaceutical packaging has slightly different regulations, and that's just something to be aware of. And our films are only flexible films as well, so we don't make the sort of the rigid films that you see in blister packs. But I think our films might have been used I think they might have been evaluated in the past as the film because of the tear properties. But I would have to check back just to confirm where that got to. I have a feeling there might have been an issue with the puncturing of the film.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. Another question for you also, Lucy, is someone's asking, how does the metallized film in the laminate affect the use in organic composting? Where does the metal go, or is it too small of an amount to be significant?
It is a very, very small amount. I think when we metallise our films, the metal on there is sort of angstroms thick, so it really is a very, very small percent. But that said, we actually tend to test our metallized films almost as a worst case scenario for the compostability. And we've evaluated all of our metallized films. They've been through all the composting testing for EN13432, and they don't affect the biodegradation or the disintegration. And we've done ecotoxicity testing as well, so we know that there isn't an impact on the summer barley and the cress plants that are grown afterwards from the compost that's produced from the film that's been disintegrated. And I guess it oxidizes to aluminium oxide, so it doesn't remain as sort of aluminium. But it's as far as we can see, there's very, very little of it there anyway, and what is there doesn't have a toxic effect on the plants when it's used in the compost afterwards.
Great, thank you, Lucy. Laura, a question for you. The tools we've seen seem all for assessing existing packs, i.e. a footprint or measure of what you already do, which seems incremental, focusing only on improving what exists. Are you aware, or does PE have any tools for new to the world ideas and innovations where the pack doesn't yet exist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Essentially, what we've helped companies do to address that is it all comes back to the lifecycle inventory databases. So Gabby produces, our Gabby team produces databases that are updated every year, and so that includes adding new materials every year that reflect sort of some of where that game-changing innovation is going. But the databases are also really comprehensive in terms of the upstream starting materials and starting processes. So in a lot of cases, we've been able to craft a kind of custom data set just based on using upstream processes and then adjusting where there might be a different processing step that produces a different material as an outcome. But there's always also the opportunity of building your own data set. So we've done that with some of the new technology companies around bio-oils, where we're really just going in and collecting the data directly from the process they're going to be using to make this material to create a data set that they can use to better understand the footprint. So there are lots of options, kind of depending on what the objective and the resources available to support the initiative are, but it is definitely possible, and it's just a matter of looking beyond some of the sort of preset tools to do it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Laura. Lucy, another question for you. Quite a lot of the packaging is transparent as a way of presenting and celebrating the product. One limitation of bioplastic flexible films like NatureFlex is that they're not see-through. Do you know of any plans or developments for transparent or see-through bioplastic films?
Well, our films are transparent. You can see through them. Similarly, PLA is an extremely transparent bioplastic film. There are some bioplastic films around, probably more ones that are based on starch, that do have a sort of a milky appearance, a little bit probably more like polyethylene, and the sort of the technical properties of these films are that the sort of starch-like films tend to be a bit more sort of soft and stretchy, and I think they're the ones that tend to have the sort of the milky appearance, whereas our film is more, it is a sort of a more dimensionally stable film, and it is transparent. It's been used applications such as sort of flow wrapping tomatoes on a tray that you might buy from a supermarket, and they are transparent.
Great, thank you, Lucy. Laura, we've got a question in here from a product designer, a packaging and product designer. And he says he gets the idea of considering product pack systems for full sustainability, but he says clients often split product from packaging development, then budget and manage them separately. So he's asking how can we overcome this barrier to complete product pack sustainability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question and a difficult one, something that a lot of our clients are wrestling with too. The packaging organization is just completely separate from the product development organization, and the collaboration is difficult. So the first thing that comes to mind, though, is maybe that's a way to offer a value-adding service for if your firm is a service provider in the area, where being able to demonstrate product system level cost savings or sustainability improvement could actually be a differentiator for the organization, and actually the integration happens behind the scenes with your team. Maybe that integration can happen even despite the separate budgets, et cetera, in order to bring that added value to the client. Otherwise, I think if there's just the integration is just not possible for whatever reason, I think trying to keep the product in mind or the packaging in mind for the product side probably still helps achieve that integration, even if there's not actually a coordinated development process. So, taking a life cycle thinking approach to, well, if we pursued this path in terms of design for the packaging, what do we know about the larger product system and how that could be captured? So you could be thinking about the optimization even if you weren't actually coordinating in a on the ground kind of way.
Thanks, Laura. another question come in. Lucy, I don't know if you want to tackle this one, but someone's asking what are the cost comparisons between conventional and bio packaging materials? Are you able to give a sort of bit of insight around that?
Yeah, it's kind of always difficult to answer questions like that because I think there's, and specifically if you're sort of looking at a laminate structure as well, where there are other elements involved, and quite often it'll depend on the sort of the decal of the film at which it's which is needed. But it's probably fair to say that the cost implications will be, I don't know, in the order of sort of 2 to 3 times more expensive. But I think one of the ways that that we like to look at it is not just on a sort of kilo for kilo basis. I think if you actually look at the cost implication per pack, then it's a very small sort of small increase on the actual cost of a pack, sort of a penny or something.
Great, thanks, Lucy. And another question for you, I think referring to the materials you were talking about. Someone was asking whether or not they're autoclavable.
I would say probably not. I think there would be sort of potential issues there. We have looked at and we are sort of evaluating our films for sort of higher temperature use, but I think autoclaving might be a step too far for now.
Okay, great. So we're getting towards the end of our questions, so if anyone does have any more questions, then please do keep sending them in, but we've got time for a couple more. Laura, someone's asking here, any tips on how to communicate the benefits of the sustainable packaging? What are the key things that people understand and want to hear? Have you got any ideas around that?
Yeah, well, a typical consultant answer would be to say it depends, but it really does depend on who you're trying to speak to. If you're talking about consumers, then the approach is very different than, say, if you're talking to a retailer customer directly. Consumers are still pretty confused about claims in general related to sustainability, particularly the mass consumer, but they do understand, recyclability and the desire to drive improvement in general. So I think, we see a lot of claims like, less plastic, less waste, that kind of thing on consumer packaging. I don't think those are necessarily effective. I think Method's approach of really driving a more value-oriented approach to the consumer, where it's a better design, it's a better, more interesting product, and it happens to also be more sustainable, tends to be more effective with consumers. When it comes to, say, communicating with retailers or other business-to-business communities, I think that goes back to that vision and goal setting process. Those vision and goals really have to be set based on what your customers think is important, because some customers will be prioritizing more this move towards renewability and recoverability of materials, and others will be focused more on cost savings and waste avoidance. So incorporating that customer expectation into your goal setting process is a critical way to make sure that you're going to be successful downstream as you implement the strategy. So there just isn't really one right answer, so to speak. Companies are still choosing multiple different paths based on whether they're in that blazing the trail sort of position like Innovia and others, or if their company is in a position to really be driving more efficiency and performance.
Great, thanks, Laura. And another question we've got here is, are there any rules of thumb for how you should go about assessing materials? Is there a hierarchy or any particular things you should be prioritizing at the beginning? Lucy, do you maybe want to tackle that one?
I don't know. I mean, is that specifically for sort of flexible materials, or is that for the whole sort of array of packaging materials? I mean, we're obviously very focused on flexibles.
Maybe you could give some insight into flexible materials.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult question to answer, because I think the different films kind of give you different properties, and I think ultimately the functionality is obviously probably the most important thing. You know, I think you need to get the functionality right, so you need to make sure that the materials are fit for purpose, and you know, I think we look at all the sort of the biopolymer films that are around, because they have different properties. Some are good in some areas, some have strengths in other areas. And it's a little bit like conventional materials. You know, the reason that we have so many different combinations of the different films that are available is because they all offer different properties, and it really depends on the application as to what you would choose.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Laura, do you have sort of any insights around what people should be prioritising when in those early stages of assessing different materials?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that vision and goal setting process. So twofold. One is focusing on the areas that are actually material to the product. So understanding the footprint first, so that you can determine what are the areas of priority for this package. It might be that the materials that make up the product in terms of materials of concern and regulations might be a bigger hit for a particular product than global warming potential or an energy consumption piece, but you kind of have to do that benchmark in order to determine where the priorities sit, but also on the understanding what your stakeholders care about, whether that's customers or if you're a consumer-facing company, sometimes the NGOs will be targeting organizations, so kind of listening to what's going on around you and what's important would also help determine a focus area.
Great, thanks, Laura. So we'll draw the session to an end now, but I'd just like to thank Laura and Lucy for their time today and for getting through so many questions, and also for everyone who's joined us for the webinar. Just to remind you all that a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform, and I'll send out a link to those once they go live. So I hope you all found it useful and interesting, and that you'll be able to join us for further webinars in the coming months. So thank you, everyone.